Welcome back to the Plan Your Federal Retirement podcast. I'm your co-host, Micah Shalansky, and with me, we have a great advisor in our office, JT Farron, joining us to talk about some really important things. JT, how's it going?
Pretty good, Micah. Excited to be here.
Oh, super excited, right? Okay, I know taxes definitely are my favorite topic. Estate planning, though, I got to say, don't turn off the pod just yet. There might be some key takeaways for you. Knowing not only how much you should leave, but what mechanisms you need to know on how to leave money to your beneficiaries, GT, is pretty important and something we run across quite often.
Super important. And it's one topic that's often overlooked. I don't know if it's because people don't want to address that. You know, the death and dying topics aren't as fun as investments, but definitely a topic that gets overlooked, but very important.
Yeah, before we go too further, I do want to do a quick little shout out to a couple of people that listen to the PYFR podcast and just gave us some great feedback on it. Special shout out to Jason and Christine. It was great chatting with you guys. I ended up just running across them in Alaska, and they were kind of talking about the podcast, which was...
Keep the compliments flowing.
But on a serious note, one of the things that our goals are to transform people's lives. That really is one of our goals that we want to do. And that transformation happens in little details. And JT and I are blessed because we get to see this on a daily, working with clients and helping little things. So often people come and they have kind of big goals, and that's great. But in order to accomplish big goals, we got to take little steps along the way. And JT, when we're working with clients, this is why we call this our process of success, right? But one of the first steps in that process is estate planning. We got to talk about the death and dying stuff.
Yeah, because it is so important, and you never know when you're going to need it, right? You think you might not need it for 20, 30 years, but then something terrible could happen, and it turns out you need that estate plan effective immediately.
So let's bring up some real life scenarios, right? Of course, all of our clients' names are Bob and Sue. And JT, we had a couple attend a presentation we did not long ago. And do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, just last year, Bob and Sue came to our seminar. And in our seminar, we talk about all the 5 areas of financial planning. We talk about estate planning. We talk about risk management, retirement income, investments, and taxes. And so this is one of the topics that we're bringing up is estate planning. Well, we got the opportunity to meet with them, or at least schedule an appointment to address some of these issues. But unfortunately, Bob passed away before we had that appointment. Terrible thing. He had been fighting cancer for a number of years, and just caught up with him right there at the end before we could meet. So I had the opportunity to meet with Sue, and first thing that we do, talk about estate planning. Well, turns out that Bob and Sue had kept their finances fairly separate, and all of their checking accounts, all the money where his checks were deposited were all in his name. And they didn't have any estate planning documents. We'll get into the documents that we think everyone should have. But one of the important documents is a durable power of attorney for financial decisions, right? They didn't have any of those documents. So he passed away, and she had to go 2 months without being able to access any bank accounts.
With no cash.
There's a mortgage payment in there. There's utilities, insurances, car payments, credit card payments. All the things had no access to money for 2 months. So they had to sell some things. They're trying to scrounge up money here and there, borrow it from family members. And just one document, durable power of attorney, could have prevented all of that. So this is very important. Getting all these documents, getting the estate plan all set up years before you need it.
Yeah, and this is why we are so passionate about these things. And it's for a selfish reason. Let's be 100% clear. This is absolutely has a selfish element to it, because we have to help the spouses pick up the pieces when you did not get your job done. And that's not a great place to put us or your spouse. Don't care about us, care about your spouse, right? Care about your kids, your loved one. And these are things, and I get it. I have a life too. I got a family, I got kids. We have things we want to do. And there's not always a priority of updating my estate planning documents. I get that. Even though I know it's important, life gets in the way. So we got to find a good way to balance that. And JT, you bring up such a good point, especially when we know there's an event happening. Oh my gosh, I'm diagnosed with cancer. Man, I can't imagine all of the things that you have to do, how you have to work with your family. You get a terminal diagnosis, but I do know some of the things you have to put on your plate and find a way to get them done. And estate planning is there. And JT, we work with a client, and he passed away a couple of years ago. we got their estate planning done before he was diagnosed terminal. And he went quick within a few months, pancreatic cancer. And while it was a very difficult thing for the wife and kids to go through, one of the things that made it a little bit easier is they didn't have to worry about the finances. Sure, there's a little bit of concern that's always going to be out there, but they had access to money to pay all the bills. They had all the estate planning documents. They knew the things that needed to take place. And so now they could really be with him and grieve and go through this process when he passed away and not worry about those things. Versus the other spouse in the situation doesn't have access to money and bank accounts. That makes life really, really hard. And you got to make some really difficult decisions that could have been avoided. So, JT, let's talk about this just a little bit. I want to make sure this is unique to federal employees. So let's talk about these documents and how they're powerful. Let's talk about how they play with your federal benefits, how the TSP comes in. And I want to make sure we're addressing that question, the title of the podcast, right? How much should you leave to your beneficiary? All of it may not be the best answers. Let's talk about that.
Great. Yeah, and the federal employees have a lot of benefits, the TSP included, FEHB, their survivor benefits. And with all of those great benefits come the opportunity to add beneficiaries. So that's going to be a big one. But kind of in general, the documents that we think everyone should have, there's 3 documents that everyone should have. So between spouses, that's 6 documents, 3 documents each. That's a durable power of attorney. Talked about that a little bit already. Advanced healthcare directive and a will. The 4th optional document would be a trust.
Now, these are really important, right? And I know we talked about them previously on other podcasts more in depth, so we're going to hit some highlights on them. That durable power of attorney gives someone else the right to make any financial decision that you can make. Now, the durable word here is really important because that means it lasts through incapacitation. This is where we can also insert our disclosures. We're not attorneys. This isn't legal advice at all, right? This is our perspective on how we see them from a financial planning point of view. But a misconception that comes up on these power of attorneys is like, oh, if I get the power of attorney, I don't need a will because I'll have power to do everything. Keep in mind the power of attorney takes place today, but whenever it's signed and enforced, but it expires upon death. So once someone passes away, that power of attorney is not active anymore. Then after the power of attorney, we got the advanced healthcare directive, right?
Exactly. And the advanced healthcare directive is a similar document, but instead of financial decisions, it's for healthcare decisions. So if you become incapacitated, who can make those healthcare decisions for you? Who can be in the operating room? And what are the protocols there?
Now, this is, again, super important because now you might be thinking, well, my God, I'm married. I don't need these documents because my wife and I are just like joint on everything and we're good to go. And that's not the society that we live in. I understand how, it should be that way and how we think it's that way. Here's a simple answer. Call your spouse's doctor and ask for information. They're probably going to tell you no because this little thing called HIPAA, right? You are not authorized to get that information. And that's the same thing if they get admitted into a hospital. My niece, I've shared this story a couple of times, so bear with me if you've already heard it before. But when she turned 18, we got her for her birthday estate planning documents. We thought it was hilarious. We got her a real gift too, but we made her do her estate planning documents, a healthcare directive, a power of attorney, and a basic will. She was born in June. Little do we know, 2 months later in August, she would go to the emergency room because she wasn't feeling good. They dismissed her because they said it's really nothing. She collapsed in the emergency room. She spent the next 2 weeks in ICU. We hear about this. We show up and I'm like, hey, I'm here to see my niece Jazz. They're like, oh, hard stop. She's an adult. And so you have no authority to come in here and see her. We pulled up that healthcare directive. With that healthcare directive, because we were on it, we were able to get in there and help administer care to my niece and to be with her during this time. If we did not have that document, the hospital did not have the legal right to allow us in the room. That'd be like just me randomly, JT, walking into your room and saying, well, I know JT, I should make his medical decisions. No, I got no authority to do that. This document's what grants you the authority. All right, I'll take a little step off my preachy box so JT can talk about the will, but these things are really, really important.
And good thing to point out there that even though you're married, you still don't have that. You need the advanced healthcare directive because HIPAA laws are so strict. So the will, when we pass away, our assets transfer to our heirs 3 different ways. The first way is by title, any joint ownership. This would be joint checking accounts, joint brokerage accounts, maybe if you jointly own your home. If one spouse passes away, the other one becomes the sole owner. It's the easiest and best way for things to transfer. The second way that things transfer are by beneficiary. This would be your TSP, could be life insurances, or even a trust. Good thing here is that it avoids probate. Probate is the third way that things transfer. If you die without a will, it's called dying intestate, and assets go through probate. Probate is the state's way of distributing your assets. They choose an executor of the estate and where those assets should go. The will doesn't avoid probate, but it gives directions for probate. So within the will, you get to decide who's your executor, and you get to decide where those assets go that didn't transfer the other two ways.
I like it. Now, JT, these are really important, right? Because a lot of times clients want to avoid probate. They're not 100% sure why, but they're like, hey, I heard probate is a bad word. Probate is the court-sponsored process for administering your assets after you pass away. The will is the document which helps guide probate, as you were talking about, right? So again, I'm just going to echo what you said. Those beneficiary designations and titling, right? If you do your titling correctly, if you do beneficiaries correctly, there's no need to go through probate. So it could be a great way that you can avoid probate and avoid some hassle by setting up that titling and beneficiary really correctly from the beginning, right?
Exactly. Now, what about that fourth document, a trust, right? If we have a will, do we need a trust? Or if we have a trust, do we still need a will?
It's a good question, right? So a trust comes into play for a couple of reasons, right? Number one is I want to avoid probate. Well, Micah, you just said you could avoid it via title and beneficiary. Sometimes, most of the time, but not always. One example could be what's called ancillary probate. Any place that you own physical, real property in, probate has to be done in that state. Only few states allow beneficiaries on titles. Alaska is one of them. One of the reasons we're one of the amazing states in the US. We allowed you to put a beneficiary on a title of a piece of real property. Most states do not allow that. So if I owned a rental property in Arizona or a second home down in Arizona and I died, even though I have titling set up in Alaska, in Arizona, they'd still have to go through probate. So one way to avoid that is we create a trust. Many different trusts. All we're talking about today is a revocable living trust. What we like about revocable trust versus irrevocable, right? Irrevocable is you sign that thing, you are done. I hope you made really good decisions. Revocable, we can make a lot of changes while we're alive. So I could use a trust if I had property in other states to own that property, and that would avoid probate. But JT, the main reason that I see is the second one, and this is why I have a trust, is control from the grave. I love titling, I love beneficiary designations, but what happens is when I do titling and beneficiary designations and I die, that money goes immediately to my beneficiary. It is now their money. They get to decide what to do with it. Okay, well, maybe that's a great decision if I'm leaving all the money to my spouse. However, what if I'm leaving all the money to my kids? I got a 15-year-old and a 13-year-old. I think they're amazing. Would I leave them a ton of money when they're 18? Let's think about it this way. Listeners, if you were 18 years young and you got a check for $1 million, what would you have done with it? But a fast car and good parties, right? And maybe a little world traveling is more than likely what we would have done with this, and we'd blow the money. And I love to say we're not guilty of that, but JT and I see this a lot of times when people inherit money. So I like a trust because it allows control from the grave. It's my money, and I want to make sure it doesn't hurt my kids. So we have rules set up in place to help guide them, to help be a parent from the grave. If they listen, they get money. If they don't listen, they don't get the money. That's kind of how we're guiding them and setting it up.
Yeah, I love that. One of my favorite exercises to do with clients is to go through the beneficiaries and put a dollar amount to each beneficiary. Say,
Yes.
Bob and Sue, did you know that your children, child 1, 2, and 3, are going to get X dollars when you pass away? Sometimes that's a big number, $1 million. Add life insurance in there and it can definitely be a lot more. Are you okay with that child inheriting that money outright with no strings attached? And the reactions I get, it's mixed, but usually it's no, we don't want to give $1 million to the 15-year-old.
And it's not that you have a bad kid. That's not it at all, right? It's what experiences have we had in life to make us successful when we get this? And that's why it's that question, how much should we leave? Now, as we talk a little bit more about that in a second, let's make sure we remember your key beneficiaries that you have as a federal employee. You have 4 different beneficiaries as a federal employee. You have your last paycheck, your FERS pension, your FIGLI, Federal Employee Group Life Insurance, and your TSP, your thrift savings plan. Those are the 4 different beneficiaries or 4 different forms. We've talked about this in the podcast, but I'm still seeing it as an issue meeting with prospects and new clients. That's something we're going to talk about again. The TSP, when they made their big changeover to the new system, and a lot of people love it, it's great, it's a lot better. I really appreciate it, but they have lost or potentially do not have a lot of former beneficiaries. So if you pull up your TSP statement, boy, JT, what is it on page 5 now? I think it's on page 5.
5, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so on page 5, it should list not only your primary, but your contingent beneficiaries. So if you look on there and it says that if it doesn't list your beneficiary, take the assumption, the most conservative option, that the TSP has lost your beneficiaries and you need to fill out the forms again. Again, you should have a primary. If I die, where does my money go first? You should have a contingent. If I die and my primary is dead, where does my money go? If you do not have a contingent beneficiary, you spell Micah, M-I-C. No, I'm just kidding, right? But you should have a contingent beneficiary on these documents. And a lot of times people will read these documents and even on the instructions, and this is where I disagree with what the government says, on the instructions, it says, great news. If you want this money to go to your spouse, just leave it blank. It'll automatically happen. Let me ask you listeners a question. Has the government ever made a mistake because of lack of clarity?
Oh, never.
No? Okay, well, JT doesn't think so. All right. So perfect. There you go. There's an option, as we like to say. I like to be abundantly clear where this is going. I have dozens of TSP stories of things that have gone wrong. I'm not knocking the TSP. They're fantastic. But where it's all people ran, mistakes can happen. I want to put as many arrows in your quiver as possible to make sure you and your loved ones are taken care of. All right, I'm going to come off my soapbox now. I mean, I'm on it a lot in this podcast. I love it. But about beneficiaries, right? Really important. I guess I'm not off it just yet because we still got bank accounts that can have beneficiaries, potentially real properties, investment accounts, retirement accounts, life insurance, like any of those things, all of those things should have a beneficiary. Then JT, I want to bring back in that comment you said. I would love to have inside of there a list of all of our clients' accounts, how much beneficiary value it is, and who does it go to in dollar amounts. That is a great idea.
Yeah, I love it. Taking it one step further, we talk all the time about survivor income analysis and doing a cash flow timeline, retirement income timeline. Then we take it one step further to say, well, we have this beautiful retirement income timeline. It shows all your sources of income and how they change over time. But how does it change if one spouse were to pass away? Is there still enough income there to provide the surviving spouse with the current standard of living?
Right. And this is a cash flow question, right? So I'll tell you a little bit my own personal story as we go through this, JT. Something happened just relatively recently is whatever I'm working with clients and if someone always comes to me and it's generally the husband and says, Micah, if I die, what does my wife do? And I said, number one, they call me right away, right? Let us know that you passed away. We're going to step up. And there's a whole little list of things that we're going to help with. And we're going to help guide, especially on the financial matters. And so I was sharing this a little bit and my wife listens to the podcast. And so she's heard me say this before. So JT hit me up the other day and says, well, Micah, what happens if you die? I said, well, great news. Your spouse calls me. Oh, wait, no, I am the one that died. Okay, great question. But I still kind of talked about it. And I was like, well, let's go through kind of what this process would be. And I ended up writing a little bit of a letter to Kelly that says, God forbid, but if I were to pass away, right? And then kind of here's the steps that you need to think about. Of course, it's getting in touch with our office, right? We're still going to follow the same steps, but she wanted to have that connection to know that she was taken care of. And it wasn't call we don't have an 800 number, but it wasn't just call the office and they'll figure it out. She wanted a little bit more of a play-by-play. So one of the things that I love spouses to do, especially for kids potentially, is after you get your estate planning documents done, write an I love you letter. Right now, run it by the attorney because we want to make sure it doesn't contradict what you said in your estate planning documents and we create an issue. But it's sweetie, if you're reading this, I'm dead. I love you. Here's some things I'm thinking about. Here's some ways I'd like you to use this money. Here's some things I hope you do inside of your life. And I got to say, sitting on the side of the table with the beneficiaries, they have cold legalese documents or an I love you letter from their parents. Which one is more valuable? It's the I love you letter, right? When I'm guiding them, they're like, Mike, I don't know what to do. I'm like, all right, well, let's look at what your dad said. All right, your dad said in the letter, he wants you to do A, B, and C. What do you think about that? You know what? He made really good decisions. Maybe I should do that. Okay, great. Now the legal documents said to go do these things, right? But it's in legalese and it's different. So that personal letter is really important. And my wife asked me for that the other day, and I just that was a good thing we should be thinking about.
Oh, it's fantastic, especially because the passing of a loved one is so hard already, not just on the emotional side, especially on the emotional side, but tying up all those loose ends and settling their estate is such a big project that to have that letter, it gives you a little bit of that closure on the emotional side, but then also the instructions. It's invaluable at that point.
And then JT, I love your point. I went off on a little bit of a tangent on that letter side, but going back to that survivor income analysis, I think is so critical, right? That says, okay, when I pass away, the cash flow is the heartbeat of retirement. Cash flow is the heartbeat of so many of these conversations. When I pass away, what income is going to be provided to my spouse? God forbid my spouse passes away, what income is provided to me? And that's going to be a corollary between how much are we spending? Now, JT, you know this answer, right? Sometimes, especially with guy math, when they're saying, hey, we're spending $10,000 a month, but one of us dies, immediately what does the guy say? Was spending going to go up or going to go down?
Well, it should go down. It should be half, right? So if we're spending 10, it goes to 5, right?
Right. Mentally, that's immediately where we go is there's not two of us, but guess what? You know what? The utilities still get left on. The mortgage payment doesn't go down. The property taxes don't go down. Your taxes actually go up because now you're single file versus married filer, right? So there's a lot of things in here which argue that your your expenses are not going to drop that much. I could be wrong. So take the more conservative option. Let's say your expenses stay the same. How are you going to replace that income? And that really answers a lot of questions when you claim Social Security, because there's a survivor benefit attachment to that. How do you use your TSP in retirement? Do you need life insurance or not need life insurance in retirement? The survivor needs analysis is really critical to help with all of those questions.
I love it. And it shows exactly how much money is going to be left over and how much income is tied to each spouse. One big misconception is that we have, in some scenarios, we have one spouse that had the full 30-year long career, and then maybe one spouse stays home with the kids. Even the spouse that stayed home with the kids has some claim to income, right? Social Security, there's the spousal benefit there. And if that spouse were to pass away, there is a reduction in total income. So it's important to look at how income changes if both spouses were to pass away and make sure that there's enough income to continue that standard of living.
And this comes to the question, how much should I leave to my beneficiary, right? And this is where life insurance comes in. Most of our clients are like, hey, everything goes to the spouse both ways. But then when it comes to the kids, well, with retirees, do you need life insurance or not? I will say a lot of our clients don't really need life insurance in retirement, but some of them do. And what I like about life insurance, this is a very simple question. It's when you die, is there enough to take care of your spouse or not? Yes or no? If yes, you don't need life insurance. If no, then you need life insurance, right? Then the question is for how long and how much. And that's just a math equation, which is, let's simplify this, right? It's just math at the end of the day. So got to have that question, how much should I leave? Enough to maintain your spouse's lifestyle. That's what you got to be looking at. Then the other question comes in, says, okay, how much should you leave to your kids? You know what? If your spouse is taken care of, you can give some to your kids, but what if there's a little bit left over to make the world a better place? Should that be something inside of your estate planning documents as well? How do you make the world a better place after you go? Something to think about.
Yeah, definitely. And a lot of different ways to go about that, whether it's a trust or just provisions in your will. So lots of things to consider there.
All right. Well, this podcast is all about taking action. I know JT and I like to get up on our soapbox, talk about a lot of things that we see with clients, and we want to translate and relate to you guys so we can spread this message. So my first action item is going to be totally a selfish one, but I want to help transform so many lives. Share this podcast, get this information out, send it to your HR, send it to other federal employees. Let's share this message to help grow, to help more federal employees be confident and competent in their retirement.
Great. Next one, I would say review your TSP beneficiaries. We mentioned that years ago, TSP lost those beneficiaries. And even if you put something on there on those forms when you first were hired, there's a chance that it might not be there anymore. So check out page 5 if nothing's there, or sometimes there's a warning label almost of what it looks like as a big exclamation point. Definitely review those. Make sure that you have beneficiaries and that they're the beneficiaries that you want.
I love it. Last action item for you guys, get your documents done. They don't have to be super complex, right? What are your goals? That's what you need to go with. If you need help with this, to pick up the phone, give us a call. Call someone that understands not only your federal benefits, but the financial planning element of how to incorporate those together to make sure you're getting the most out of your benefits and your spouse, your survivors are taken care of. Thank you guys so much for joining us on this journey, JT. I really appreciate you being on the podcast. And until next time, happy planning.